Trying to start the recording. Okay. Thank you everybody for coming out. We have a few things we want to talk about today. We're going to talk, since we are in the short last week before we will push our upload ability into UASIS, that where you can store student documents inside of UASIS instead of a hard folder. We wanted to kind of go over what needs to be in a student folder and how long you need to keep certain things. So we're going to go over all the retention details about that, and also what we, as Alex and I come into our program monitoring visits, what we are looking for and what we expect to see inside of all of these as well. We're also going to talk about a couple of new features inside of UASIS. For any of those that were there at our directors meeting this earlier week, this will be a repeat on some of the stuff. I go into a little bit more depth, but for those that are brand new and those that are watching, this is kind of a view on the new UASIS features that we have, and the expectations of some of these new features. So with that, quick overall data maintenance that we talk about every month. Have you logged into UASIS and to enter data? Um, I see a lot of emails that I'll get about, hey, I need this fixed, I need that fixed, which is great. It lets me know that you guys' programs are entering data. If you haven't entered any data, please do so quickly. We do run data on a regular basis to see how our programs are doing. It also is what helps us determine what information needs to be taught in these third Thursdays. It also allows our desk monitoring visits, from our other state colleagues, to be able to help you identify problems, areas, concerns, and as well as additional trainings that we need to do. Is your data entered in a timely manner? The state policy requires that you should enter data no more than 2 weeks behind, or for 2 weeks. I have many programs that do it on a daily basis, and many do it on at least a weekly basis. If you are behind in any of your data, please get caught up as quick as possible. If you have any questions, need any sort of help, please reach out. We are always happy to do any sort of trainings, and just kind of help you get into the get caught up with your data. And the last thing is, have you set an entering EFL for each of your students? There are, again, two ways that you can do this. Pre-testing is primarily the best way to do it for all of your students. However, if you do have a student that you are unable to test for a reason, you can enter a provisional a provisional EFL. We will talk a little bit about provisional EFLs later today, so I'm going to kind of pause it right there. But making sure that students have entering EFLs set for each one of them. All right, so digging into what you need to keep. This first slide talks about fiscal documentation. Stephanie wanted me to hit on this to make sure that you are keeping what needs to be kept financially wise. Again, these will not go inside of a student's folder, but this is what you need to keep as a program. That way, if there are any questions or concerns that do get brought up, that you do have the information that you do need. Um, so for all programs that have state grants, you need to keep the documentation for 1 year after the completion of the grant. So for this grant that we have this current year, you will need to keep it up, or once the year ends, so on June 30th of 2025, you need to keep that information up to another one more year. If your LEA does require you to keep it longer, you do need to keep it longer, but us at the state level, we require that you must keep it for at least 1 year. This includes the state plan and applications, any documentation of any expenditures that you have, and any reimbursement requests that you have. This is specifically for those that ask and receive supplemental requests. You do need to submit reimbursements. If you haven't submitted any reimbursements, please do so immediately. We do need to keep track on what's coming, or our finances and what we have. And we get hounded at the state level if reimbursements aren't sent in as well. For those that receive federal money, so for federal grants, this must be kept for 3 years after the day of the program submits to USB the last expenditure for the report for the program year. So for 3 years, you need to keep this information. This would include the application for the grant, any documentation of expenditures, and of course, any reimbursement requests. So state needs to keep it for 1 year, at minimum 1 year, unless your program tells you otherwise. Federal grants need to be kept up to 3 years after the last day of the expenditure report for the program year. Okay, so let's get into more of the details of students and what needs to be kept when and where and how long. All of this information that we're going to go over today can be found in the Director's Policy and Procedure Guide. You can download the most recent update of the Policy and Procedure Guide from the USBE website in under Adult Education. So under the adult education site, you'll go to the directors and coordinators, and you will find the policy and procedure guide there that you can download and look at. Inside of that guide, you are going to be looking for section 6. That talks all about data, how long to keep things, and everything else. To keep things, you do have one of two ways that you can keep your information. You can keep it as a physical file. That would be keeping them in manila folders, any sort of physical files that you do have that you can keep track of which students are which. If you do keep physical files, they need to be kept in a secure location. That could mean that they are kept in a locked filing cabinet in your office, or if you had a secure room that the door is locked, you can keep it in there without the filing cabinet needing to be locked. But all physical files need to be kept in a secure location. If you don't want to keep physical files and you want to move more into the digital realm, you have a couple of different ways. We are about to release. Alex and I have completely tested our digital file upload inside of UASIS. So we are going through the final testing stages of that, pushing it into our test environment to allow our user group to test that. And then it should be out next week. But you are welcome to upload files into UASIS. I will send more information about the types of files and everything else when that does come out. You may also store files on a Google Drive if your LEA will allow you to do that. I do know that some of the LEAs are not wanting programs to use Google Drive to store student information, and that is fine. Some programs will. So if your LEA allows you to do that, you are welcome to use Google Drive. Or if the LEA provides you a network space, that is fine as well. Again, all of these must be, I mean, with the exception of UASIS, as that is already a secured location. The Google Drive, the LEA network, they must be kept in a secure location, meaning that only certain people has access to these areas. And so that would be the director, the data admin. If you need a specific teacher or something to have access to that, they can. Just that way it is not open to everybody within your LEA to access these files. That's the only caveat that we're giving about the digital files. If you have additional questions, I'm happy to sit and talk with you about that. Um, but that is usually our caveat, is just making sure that it is in a secure location. With digital files, also, if you do store them digitally, we need to have access to them when we do come for monitoring visits. We need to be able to have complete access into it. So you either can give us access to a Google Drive, you would be able to give us access to the LEA network. We are okay using your guys' computers to log into that network, but we must be able to have access to these files as we do come out. If you do store them inside of UASIS, of course, we will have access, and so we won't need to worry about access into that. All right, so when we start talking about these files, we have two different retention periods that we as adult education use everything. And again, all this information is at the state level. Your LEAs may require you to keep certain things for longer, or but if your LEA says that you can keep them from shorter, you need to keep whichever one is longer. So 3 years, when we talk about data being kept for 3 years, that's 3 years after the program year ends. So even though a student may only come in July and August of this year, it's not 3 years after they leave. It's 3 years after the program year ends. So that information will need to be kept for 3 years after June 30th of 2025. The other one is the term in perpetuity, which means forever. There's no reason. This is a handful of things, but they need to be kept forever. Now, it doesn't mean that you have to keep them on at your location forever. It's just the information needs to be kept forever. I know a number of LEAs use a digital service that keeps them. Some will use a storage facility that their LEA uses. But again, those will need to be kept forever, so where you can have access to them if you need them. So let's talk about what goes into each one of these records. Um, so the first one we're going to talk about are the intake forms, the release waivers, the grievance policies. Um, these need to be kept for 3 years. Again, if the LEA requires it to be longer, please keep them for longer. But this is the information that we will be looking for, is that they need to be kept. We are specifically looking for the most recent intake form when we do come. We would recommend that intake forms get renewed every year. That way you guys have the latest and greatest information from the students. What is their physical address, phone number, that kind of information. But again, we are looking for the check marks, one in either of the blue areas that they either give permission or they deny, but we are specifically looking for signatures and dates on both the release waiver and the grievance policy. So keep that in mind as we are looking at that. We do seem to find that that is one of the bigger things, is maybe students will only sign one and not the other. Um, but they do need to understand and sign both of the information. Proof of residency. Proof of residency needs to be kept again for 3 years as well. There are many, many things that can count. One thing that we do want to bring to your attention that we have seen is that transcripts from K-12 or a college can be used as a student's proof of residency. However, the date on the document must be within the past 12 months. That's not that the print date on that transcript needs to be within the last 12 months. It's more that the student needs to have attended within the last 12 months. So if you have a senior that is coming into your program and you want to use that as their proof of residency, you can use that for up to 12 months, and then you'll need to make sure that you have some new form of uh, residency for them. But it's not, again, transcripts can be used as proof of residency, but they must be within the last 12 months. Having a student bring their K-12 transcript and they didn't attend for 3 years ago will not count. They will need something else. All of this information is inside of section 2 in our policy and procedure guide about what counts and what information we're looking for proof of residency. Transcripts from K-12 need to be kept for 3 years or awarded credit. That would be information that they're being awarded. So um, work experience, for example, would be considered awarded credit. That all needs to be kept for 12 years. We do plan on allowing programs to import K-12 transcripts. That is going to be my summer project that I'm going to work on to be able to get the upload piece working. So even if you import data from the Utrecht system, the Utah K-12 system, you will need to keep, we do highly recommend that you ask for a transcript, and you will need to keep that one inside of the system. So keep that in mind as we do move forward with imports, that you do still need some sort of hard copy as well. HSC candidate and adult education and eligibility form. This is specifically for those that are withdrawing from K-12. So for our 16 to 18-year-olds, this does need to be kept in their form or in their file for 3 years, not just until their cohort graduates. So if we do have, say, a 19-year-old and they withdrew, we are expecting to see that inside of their record as we do monitor those. Uh, if a student has a special education IEP, and again, this would be for students that are under the age of 22, this does need to be kept for a minimum of 3 years. I do know that a number of LEAs do require this to be kept longer. Most I've heard is about 7 years. So please double check with not just this one, but all of these different records to make sure that what we say and what your LEA says is either in line with each other, or that you take whichever one is greater. Assessment protocols. This includes appraisals or locators from the tests, as well as pre and post tests. So we need to see the answer sheets. Those answer sheets need to have the student's name, the date they took, who gave that test, what the score is of it. Those are all pieces that we are looking for on our assessment protocols. If you do give them online, there is usually a uh, summary form at the end of the score for all of that. That counts as the assessment protocol. So we're not necessarily looking for the A, B, C, D, whatever. But this does need to be kept for 3 years. And when we do our program monitoring visits, we do look 3 years back and we will check to make sure that those are all there. And the last thing for the 3 years that I want to mention is any sort of record of accommodation provided with appropriate documentation. Um, So this would be if they have any sort of accommodations for testing, for example, that needs to be kept inside of their file. But if they have any sort of accommodation and the documentation, that does need to be kept inside of the system or inside of the student's file. Before I move on to some of our additionals, is there any questions about any of the things that we have talked about?
I have a question, Adam.
Sure.
While you were talking about transcripts, you mentioned that we need to also keep a hard copy. So we're not talking about a physical copy though, right? It's if it's in UASIS, and then I also have it in a file in my documents, is that okay?
Yeah, so I'm not yeah, I mean it's like saying that you're going to upload all of the documentation into some sort of or digital area. I'm not saying that you need to keep a physical copy of all of this, but we can't say that that UASIS is what counts as that because by the off chance that something happens with UASIS, we would like the programs to be able to not have to say, "Oh, I need to log into UASIS to get that information." And so what we usually recommend is especially when a student say graduates, that you would print off a copy or you could save a digital copy onto your network and you could keep it there. And so that's what we mean. That's what we're talking about when we're saying you need to keep it. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yes, perfect. Thank
Okay,
you.
perfect. Any other questions? All right. If you have any questions, we have the chat that's open. You're also welcome to come off of mute. I have a couple of our state employees with us today, so I don't have to keep track of as well as much. Okay, speaking of transcripts, what you must keep forever is an official cumulative transcript. So, a USB or an adult education transcript. This is what they need. You need to keep forever. And again, as I just stated, simply having this inside of UASIS, I would not say counts. And the only reason why is we have ran into a couple, very few scenarios in which we either can't find a transcript, something happened with the documentation, and this has happened just because we've transferred systems twice now since I've been here. But something goes on. If you have an official transcript kept outside of UASIS, that would be fantastic. That way you can have and grab a copy of that. Not saying that UASIS isn't a good system and it's always going to be online, but there is potentially those hiccups that maybe our system is just down because of uh, power outage, whatever. I just don't want to leave a student hanging because they're trying to rely on our system being up 100% of the time. So when a student graduates specifically, and it would be good at the end of the year to print off an official transcript. That way, keep that in the student's file. That way, there's an update of exactly where they are and what they're at. Transcript requests out of or transcript requests specifically out of district. Something that I've recently learned here, and this is I'm going to read this as this is the way it was given to me, is under FERPA, schools are allowed to share student information with another school at which the student seeks to intend to enroll, if the information is for the purpose of enrolling the student. This can be done without the student's consent if the LEA sending the record has included a certain statement in their annual notice of FERPA rights. Most LEAs, I have been told, do this, so it is likely allowable that you will not need an official transcript request form. But if you are sending a transcript request form, say out of state, that does need to be kept in the student's file, so it is aware of um, that this information was requested. But within within LEA, specifically within your own LEA, as well as within most of the states of Utah, We would say that we're not going to be looking for this as it is most likely not needed anymore. But do keep that in mind that making sure that that annual notice of the FERPA rights has the correct documentation written inside of there for your LEA. Just that way, we're not having to necessarily look at this. But if you do have any sort of transcript requests, and that could be both ways, both you requesting the transcript as well as someone requesting a transcript from you, that information does need to be kept in there. And any copies of release information, this would be for DWS or for the Army. That's what my left one, or that's what my right one, for an example, is. If any of these have a release of information that they have signed and they're asking for it, this information needs to be kept. That way we can track of who has the student's documentation in case there were any questions that either the student arose or that came from the LEA or the state level. We would have that information. So though we don't have tons of information that need to be kept forever, but this is the kind of information that does. I would recommend when we do launch into having documents being uploaded into UASIS, this type of information does get uploaded into the system. That way there is no question about where is it, and we can follow that information pretty easily from the system. Any questions about documents that need to be kept forever?
There is a question in the chat, Adam.
Okay, perfect. The question, how do we deliver the FERPA rights annually? I believe, I wish I had Stephanie here. Danny, do you know an answer to that question? It's possible she's on.
Um,
There we are.
I am not sure.
Okay. Jamie, I will, and for the rest of those that are online, I will talk with Stephanie. She is at another meeting that she had to attend. I will ask her about this annual notice of FERPA rights. It might be something that is on the LEA's website or the school district's website. I don't know if it's something, it might also be something that the students sign or that the parents sign when they register their students each year. I will figure out where it is and if there's anything that we need to specifically do for it. But that I honestly don't know. This was new to me within the last week or so. So I'm just as new about learning all of this as you guys are. But we will find out and we will let you guys know. Okay, any other questions? Okay, all right. Little tips and tricks that we have found that we wanted to allow you guys to that we have seen that works well in other programs, and we want to pass along. Again, all of this has been with the stamp of approval from the programs. You'll see that this is from Granite. But a couple of things that we have seen that work really, really well is a checklist for the enrollment documentation. So if you had, this is the information that you need when you enroll, that works really, really well. Some programs will do it with a sticky note that you can see on that far right hand side. This is the information they need. You'll see that there's dates on there. If your program does require a payment, that can be on there as well. But it just kind of helps you keep track of exactly what the student has already given you, what's inside of the folder. And you'll see on here that there's testing information that allows you to do that kind of information. You'll see that the other two are more of a personalized cumulative file. Now, Alex has done a really great job about creating a um, generic personalized cumulative file that you can have. It's got transcript information on there. You'll see that on that far side, it's transcripts sent and transcripts received. There is that permanent record card inside, which is your, looks like it's the summary of credits. If you are looking for one of these and you want to keep a physical file for your students, contact Alex. She does have this that she can send you, and then you can print your own. And you can also tweak it with any sort of personalization that you want. You'll see that Granite Peaks, for example, has stamped theirs with what their logo is. So you do the same thing with yours. You could stamp it with your own logo. But these are a couple of things that we have seen inside of that works well for programs. A couple, excuse me, a few other file responsibilities. One thing as we do move into the digital realm that we would like to see a naming convention happen. If you do use, say, Google as your main hub, or that you use an LEA network drive, that you have a naming convention. So it could be that it's the last name of the student, first name of the student, and the student ID number, and then maybe inside of that you break everything out by program year. Also, with just naming the files themselves, a lot of the times, especially when you scan stuff, it's simply maybe the name of what the scanner is, along with just a serial ID number. But changing those so that they do make sense on what they are. I will say that that's probably what takes Alex and I the longest when we do see physical or digital files, is just seeing which files are what. So just keeping a naming convention as you do go into that digital realm. Remember that SSNs need to be blacked out. This can be done by using a redacting pen or a security stamp. Yes, most of the time we do see that markers work fairly well, just like Sharpie markers. However, there are still some times that I can see through them, so technically it's blacked out. We don't dock anything from the program, but I could, if I either hold it to the right light or if I look at it on the back, I can still see potentially all 9 numbers of that SSN. So maybe look into a redacting pen. That the redacting pens, I will give you the warning that they bleed like crazy, so they do really, really well. Security stamps are also good. You can do just a stamp or a roller. I've seen those in the past as well. Yearly intake forms. I did mention this when we did talk about intake forms, but getting updated information from the students. Um, One of my goals this summer, in addition to imports, is also getting the students to be able to register online. I would love to say that I'll get the student portal online at the same time. I can't guarantee that, but making sure that you have this student demographic information, when we can get all that digital stuff that the student can do it, it might be a little bit easier to tell the students, hey, log in and update your information, and then you'll approve all that. Until then, we can make you can make like a small intake form of like the address, phone number, that kind of stuff, and just anything that you need to update for the student. And then, of course, physical digital files. Again, I can't emphasize enough. Make sure that they're in secure locations. I have seen a number of times I'm walking through a program and I'm seeing student files sitting on the edge of a desk. I know that you guys are currently actively working on a lot of this stuff, but making sure that those are in a secure location. So if you do keep stuff at your desk, maybe make sure that your drawers lock, especially if you're walking away, put them in, tuck them, out of sight in that secure location. I just don't want any of our programs to get hit with, oh, this stuff wasn't secure, and we have to go in and do other sort of audits and upgrades. That's all I've got for this. Is there any questions about anything that goes in a file, how long you need to keep it, anything like that? Okay. All right. Let's talk a handful of UASIS updates. Many of you, and I haven't seen my list of who's here, but many of you on this list should have received an email last week that said, here are UASIS updates, and kind of what they are. I mentioned that we were going to have an additional training on a handful of these, and this is that additional training. If you do have additional questions after this, please let me know. I will set up another time with you that we can go through all of this, so that we do make sure that we are collecting the information in the correct manner. So let's talk about entering EFL notice. All three of the pieces that I'm going to talk about today are under the program tab on the side. Before, if you would click on that program tab, you would simply be taken to that first programs tab and it would say coming soon. Currently, that is still where it's going to take you, but you will also now notice that there are 3 new tabs up along the top. The first one is this entering EFL notice. We have been told by NRS that a student over 12 hours should be on all of our federal reports, whether they have been tested or not. Now, we do understand that sometimes it takes a little bit longer to get students in and tested, and maybe something will happen between the time that they come in and the time that they leave or drop off from our face of the earth. And those students will then end up getting separated due to on auto separation, or you guys separate them because they no longer need our services, but they never somehow got an entering EFL assigned to them. This page will show you any student within the program year that is over 12 hours, has separated from your program, but never had an entering EFL associated to their profile. So, this is what I'm asking for you guys to clean up on a monthly basis for sure by the end of the program year. What you will see here in this example is that you've got 3 students. You will see that there's a begin date for all of these students. You'll see the total number of hours. Um, what is blacked out would be the student's name and number. You can click on that to see the student's profile in case you needed to know whether the student was an ESL or an ABE student, whatever it happened to be. And then you will see the separation reason. Why did they get separated? We'll see an auto separation here. We'll see that they fulfilled their purpose. The last thing that you will potentially see on here is this section called recoverable MSGs. The reason that they are called recoverable MSGs are these are MSGs that could count for your program if the student was on your federal tables. So you'll see them on my first and third example that there's an HSE recoverable MSG for these. More than likely, this would be a student who came in, worked with us for a little bit. They never got tested, went and took the GED, passed the GED, and left. But since you never got that test in there, they do have over the 12 hours. We need to get them onto our reports. So you will assign a provisional test for them. You will click that drop down. You will select which level you are wanting to do. In this case, as recoverable MSGs, especially in HSE, they'd probably be an ABE level 5 or 6. You'd hit save on that, and the student will now start to show up on your table 4s, all of your federal tables. They will count for you. What I'm asking is by the end of the program year that every program has no entering EFL notices on any of their students. Yes, when we go into the dual year period, you will still be able to clean these up, but I am asking that this gets cleaned up as soon as possible, that you do go in there. Is there any questions about this notice?
There's a question in the chat. Is it available now?
Yes, this is available right now. If you are having issues seeing it, I would recommend clearing your cookies or cache, making sure you do that outside of UASIS, meaning on the login screen. I have noticed that that seems to be a caveat with some of these. If you are still having issues, send me a message. I'm happy to jump on a phone call with you and see what's going on, but that usually seems to clear up most of the issues. But yes, everything that I'm talking about today is currently active inside of the system. We pushed it last week. So some of you may have already done this. Others, this is kind of the first time that you are seeing what this does.
Adam, could I ask a quick question?
Yes, you can.
On this, I came back from our director's meeting and tried to have my staff start doing the post-exit follow-up. So we cleared the caches, we did everything, and they don't have the option of seeing program or entering EFL notice and post-exit follow-up. So I don't know. And I changed permissions. I gave them like full permissions on everything, and it didn't seem to affect anything. Just a FYI for you.
Okay. Send me an email with who these are. That way I can take a look specifically at them and get into it. I haven't heard of any other kind of weird, funky bug. Remember that almost everything that we launch, especially new pages, are all permission based. So I do automatically give permissions to those that have all of the permissions inside of UASIS already. So directors, data admins, I give those permissions when we do the update. But for new people that you want to do this, you will have to give that. So that also might be potentially why some of this isn't showing up, but it does sound like between Andrea's given that and Jamie, it sounds like I am fairly certain you have all permissions as well, that should be working. So I'm happy to work with you out
Okay.
off of the call and we can get this squared away.
Okay, sounds great. Thank you.
Thanks. All right. So as Andrea mentioned, post-exit follow-up. For those that remember in our old system, this is a bring back of one piece in there that was called the outcome call list. What this does is this allows us to see lists of students that we need to make our post-exit follow-ups. Those post-exits are our first, second, third, and fourth quarter after exit employments, whether they are employed or not, as well as post-secondary enrollment and post-secondary credentials. Those are 6 things that we need to follow up on all of our students. Now, we can't follow up on every one of them immediately because we don't have, say, for example, third quarter from students that recently separated. So this allows you to select certain quarters for students, seeing who separated during that time, and it will then show you the information that you do need to follow up on. So when you get to this page, you will select which date range you want to follow up on. Now, every quarter that you will see in that drop down is a quarter that needs to be followed up on, meaning that we're going to report on every one of those. Doesn't mean that I'm going to report this year on them. It could be that I report on them next year, especially for my more recent quarters. But any of my oldest quarters, so the ones that are down at the bottom, I am going to report on those this program year. So those are the students I would make sure you have followed up on and then move forward. But you could, as long as you follow up on all the students, I really don't necessarily care the order in which you do it. So when you select the quarter, you will get this next section that shows up about your follow-up students. This is the list of students that separated during that time, had an active period of participation that we need to follow up. 2 flags that we added to this is remove students that have an SSN and remove students that can data match. The reason we would want to remove both of these students is if a student had no SSN and refused to allow us to data match, there is nothing I can do data match wise to get these students. So those would be students that you have to follow up on. When I was looking through that, that wasn't very many students, but those are students that you would definitely have to follow up on because I can't send them to DWS. When you see that drop down list underneath, you'll see it says student name, student ID, and follow up record. That is the pattern in which I do. So you would see the student name first, followed by the ID. And then inside of the brackets allows you to see how many times a certain student has been followed up with. And follow up logs can be added, and I'll show you in just a second on how to do that. So when you click on the student, what you will end up seeing is a page similar to this. There is a prompt that shows up underneath. It says it's a very basic prompt. It's a generic one for every program. You don't have to use it, but if you just want to use it just to get started and then tweak it the way you want, we are not going to upload any new sort of prompts inside of the system, but we are happy to give you this prompt. And if we need to tweak this for the whole state, we will. But what it does is it introduces who you are from the program you are, and it just talks about, job and education information. Underneath that, you will see the call time. It's a timestamp on which you may or are attempting to make the call. You will see both the phone number and the email address. If a student has both of them inside of there, that is underneath. Now, both the phone number and the email address on here, if you click on them, it's like hitting Control C, copying that information to your computer. You can then go and paste that. So if you're going to want to send an email to a student, you can just copy that email and hit send. Down the line, we do plan on allowing a bulk mass entry of these follow-ups through email. That will come down the line. But it's not something we have yet. So you can send this out either on an individual basis or go through each one and copy and paste. You'll see that there's a set of period of participation dates with the date that they attended. And the thing underneath it, the email is to see the student's profile. You click on that, that will allow you to see the information for what the student was. Then I mentioned that there are 6 follow-ups. Here's each of the 6 follow-ups. When you make the phone call, the date range underneath each one of the titles is the date range we are looking for. So when you make the phone call, for this student, for example, we would say, hey, if they had time to talk, they're willing to talk, we would ask the question, hey, did you have employment between October 1st of 2024 and December 31st of 2024, yes or no? And that's really all we're asking for is just, hey, a yes or no answer. They'll give us one. As soon as they do that, we hit save, and that saves the record. If I have more than one of these that is open at a time that has a more than one yes, I can ask more than one question. So in this case, I can ask about employment first quarter and employment second quarter. Now you'll see with the employment second quarter, the no is grayed out. It's a lighter gray. If you hover over it, it will give you a notice stating that the student is not yet eligible to mark a no, and it won't be until after March 31st. We're not going to allow you guys to mark yeses and nos on information that we can't currently collect. You shouldn't be marking a no on this until after that date has passed. So that's why the no's would be checked out. So if they said no, I don't have a job right now, maybe ask them, are you trying to find one? Get, prompt them to get into that, because maybe they are currently, maybe they have an interview set up for next week. Whatever the situation happens to be, you can say, hey, if you have an interview set up next week, maybe I'll call you in 2 weeks or something and just see how that interview did. You can make some sort of note and then call back and follow up with that student later about that employment. Maybe they did get one, but they do have the entire quarter in order to get the job. So even if they got a job on March 31st, that it counts as a yes for that entire quarter. It's not that they had a job for the majority or anything of that quarter, but they just had to have had a job at least during that quarter. Third and fourth quarter are the same ways. Post-secondary enrollment and credentials have a different timeline. The timeline starts from the time that they enrolled in adult education to a year after their exit. So that is a much larger broad span. So again, that's a yes and no. And again, the no will not show up until after that final date. So if they say yes at any point during that time, you can click yes and hit save, but you will never be able to hit no until after the end date for each one of those. Now, if you do mark a yes or no on any one of these, a follow-up record will automatically be added to the student's record. If you called and maybe it was not a good time for them, you can click the blue add follow-up record. You'll select the follow-up outcome, which one of the options is that they were not able to talk right now. There's a few other different options you can go and look through. If you needed to add any notes, you can do that. If you need to call them back, that they said, hey, now's not a good time, but call me back on such and such a day and time, you can add that information and put that all in there. I am currently working on a report that allows you to pull all callback information so that you can see those. So we are still tweaking this. This is the first piece of this post exit, but know that we are working on that. And then hit save for the follow up record. Um, One thing before I go on, was there any questions about this process right now? I know it was a lot of information, but I just wanted to see if there was any questions. I see that there is a question in the chat of how do we do this with inmates at the prison. So inmates at the prison, when you separate a student, one of the questions is the student is still incarcerated. If the student is still incarcerated, they do not need post-exit follow-ups. They should not be on this list. If they are on this list, then they were separated incorrectly. Um, but for those that are working with our prisons, you would probably check the checkbox for most of the students inside of the prison and your jails, unless they are being released, and that's the reason that they are separating. Then you would want to make sure and leave that check mark unchecked. But yes, for those that are still incarcerated, hopefully they were separated correctly, and they should not show up on this list. Other questions before I continue on with this? Okay. One thing I do want to mention this, and this is only for employment second quarter. When you click yes on employment second quarter, a new field will pop up underneath asking for the second quarter earnings. This is the only one that we actually care about the earnings for. Now, if they know how much they earned during that quarter, great. You can simply enter that number. Most users or most students, I would imagine, don't know how much they did. So we have this little calculator button. You'll see that it's a little like mathematical button that's to the side, and this calculate quarter earnings will pop up. When you click on that, you can ask the student any question or any way that they want to calculate it. So you have it by hour, by week, by 2 weeks, or bi-weekly, or per month. If you do it on, say, an hourly basis, it's going to ask you how much the student earned per hour, what their average number of hours were per week, and then you hit calculate. It will calculate what that is, and it will plug it in that second quarter earnings for you. It will do that for every one of those, so it will help you calculate that quarterly earning. Um, if a student does refuse to answer that quarterly earnings amount, um, don't fret. We still want the yes, but NRS has asked us that we simply put $1 in for the earnings and hit save. That's just what they have told us to do. So that again, that's only if the student refuses to answer that question. Most students that I have heard when they do get to ask this question are fairly open about it. Most don't usually care too much. They do trust you guys more than they would trust just giving this information to someone else. So you can calculate that in multiple ways. But again, if they don't answer that, then do please just put a 1 in there and hit save. Okay, that is post-exit follow-up. The last thing that I want to mention about this, and this is this green little cloud button, and most will recognize this throughout the system. You can download all of your follow-up students for that quarter so that you can make calls offline. Maybe you need to give this to someone else in order to make them have the calls, whatever the situation happens to be. But you can download these students and do that offline. If you do that offline, you will need to then put the information back in, and you can do that again from the same page. You'll pull the quarter. The difference is that this will be this override date option next to it. You will click that checkbox, and it's going to ask for a date and a time, and that would be the date and time that the staff member made the call. So maybe it was last week. Maybe it was last Wednesday at 1:30 in the afternoon. The override date you will put in is last Wednesday at 1:30 p.m. And then when you do any sort of your follow-up records or anything like that, it will accurately reflect the time in which they were called, not immediately right now. So you can export this, import that data on a later basis, but know that you can do that so that users don't have to have access to this page in order for them to do the calls. It's just so there are two different ways. Again, if you have any questions about this page specifically, it seems like we had a couple of them. Please let me know. I am happy to get you guys up and rolling on this. Starting next program year, Alex and I, as part of our data monitoring visits, will be looking at how many of these you have done. Not just how many successful ones have happened, because we know that not all of them were going to be successful, but we are asking that you do, as a program, make the effort to do this. So we are going to look at the program's follow-up records. Are you guys doing these post exits? Because I know that my data matches are never going to be 100% because I don't have all the SSNs and people refuse to data match. So, okay. The last thing I want to talk about are volunteers. Stephanie and I have felt that in the past we are underreporting how many program volunteers we have in this that are working with adult education. So we have created this program volunteers. What this is this is a page for you to add names of those volunteers that work with your program. I know getting initially started, this may seem like a hassle, as I've talked with some of our CBOs and larger programs that do use program volunteers, and I'm going to work with them on an individual basis. But if you do work with volunteers, I would ask that you come to this page, click the button that says add volunteer, and fill out the information. The only required piece of information is the name. Um, and so you'll add, well, the name and which function they are fulfilling. So whether they were a volunteer as a teacher, whether they were a volunteer as a counselor, that information needs to be added inside of the system. And again, this is only for staff member or for volunteers that are not UASIS users. So if you have a volunteer that you have added as a user inside of UASIS, whether they have login permissions or not, you do not need to add them. These this list will pull both UASIS users that are marked as volunteers as well as anyone that you do add. We do feel that this will give us a more accurate representation when both state and federal ask us how many volunteers that are working with our programs. This will give us a more accurate representation of exactly what they are. If you have any questions about how to use this, please ask us. In the future, you will be able to see previous school volunteers as well, so that you could move volunteers, well, copy volunteers from one program year to the next. So that is what that future site is going to end up doing, is allow you to select that. Are there any questions about any one of these three tabs new tabs up at the top? Okay. If you have any questions, please reach out. The UASIS webmaster is the best way to contact us. That can be asking for training, that can be asking for questions. Again, all of these also have how-to guides on our Google Drive, so you can do that and follow the step-by-step instructions there. You do have access to our test environment so that you could actually try this out before you actually try doing it with any of the actual students. So know that you can use that as a training guide for you guys. And I'm happy to have any conversations, question, and answer any questions that you want. That's all I've got. So thank you so much for coming today. Plan on us having our next third Thursday next month on the 17th of April. And I will send in more information out about that. Thanks, guys.